Howdy, my name is Dean Maggot. For the Field Experience podcast, I decided to go ahead and interview with someone from a different culture. I interviewed with a guy named Raj. Full name was Deedij Reddy. He's originally from India and moved here in August of 2022. The reason he came here was to get his master's degree. He did his undergrad in India, so he came over here to pursue that. This was his first time coming to the U.S., so he had to fully adjust to the new culture completely. In the interview, I focused on cultural differences and, how the communication is different from here and there, specifically on social interactions and how those differences impacted him moving to the United States. One of the first things Raj mentioned whenever he arrived to the United States, or mentioned about when he arrived, is is how different everyday life felt compared to India. One of the things he mentioned was that the people in College Station are just so much more outgoing and kind than those of India, which helped make the transition easier for him. But there were still so many differences that, stood out and stood in his way. For example, one thing he said was he found it interesting how fast people drive here. He said in India that people do not go that fast. And then one of the funny things that he mentioned that I thought was unique was that it's weird to him how many people run around with their dogs here, and particularly shirtless. That was one of the specific things that he said was very weird. Another thing he noticed was how people greet each other here. In India, it's not as common for someone to walk up to a stranger and say, "Hello, how are you?" Here, obviously, that is a common thing, and he noticed that was weird to him. Major social norm, a major difference in social norms. The openness in the U.S. just does not translate to India. Lastly, he mentioned how expensive everything is in the U.S. and how difficult it can be to keep up with the financials in the U.S., but put an emphasis on how many opportunities there are in the U.S. So it kind of goes hand in hand. One of the biggest takeaways from the interview was the difference in communication, right? I mean, and from the culture in India to the culture in the United States, the difference in how we communicate with each other is so yeah, different. It's just such a big gap there. Um, and people interpret messages differently, and you just never know how someone could understand something in a totally different way. For example of this, Raj mentioned that in India, people often rely on nonverbal communication. He mentioned something such as the infamous Indian nod. Um, Instead of clearly stating something like someone in the US would, they 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 communicate in this indirect way of the nod, and it can create a lot of confusion if you come to America for the first time and not, that doesn't translate here. He also mentioned how difficult it was to communicate. I know we touched on this, but specifically the language barrier and the difference in expectations of how you speak to people, right? You're not fully understood because of the difference in language, right? So that was a huge step for him when he moved here. Um, Lastly, he said it was different coming here because in India they're so formal, right? Everyone with a higher rank in you, let's say the workplace, for example, is sir, boss, ma'am, anything that shows respect, right? Versus the US, it might be a little more lax. They say, hey, such and such, right? Like you can call your boss by their name as long as you show those respectful mannerisms, right? Um, Moving on to his adjustment, he explained that one of the hardest parts of moving to the US was being away from his family, which I think any of us could relate to that, right? I know I couldn't do it. No way I could move that far away from my family and function. But over time, it became his new normal, right? He developed his own family in the United States, and that's how he coped with being so far away from his family. He mentioned that the U.S. has changed him personally. Um, he's become a lot more independent since he got here. Noticed that if he doesn't do it, it's not going to get done, right? And it just shows that people have to adapt to these new cultures, and these new normals are just not normal. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do. He said that the most influential part of him moving here and helping him adapt was the people he met. For example, I know like me and my friend group, we come from New Braunfels, Texas, and we probably have stereotypes of being country people and stuff. And he we he found his way into our friend group and we adopted him, and we love Raj, and but the people around him, he said, is the biggest impact on him being able to adapt. Um, Going into kind of a personal reflection stage, I learned how much culture, impacts communication in major ways. I didn't realize this before. I mean, it's unbelievable how difficult communication can be through different cultures, and that's one of the biggest things with anyone. Um, it really changed my perspective on how important communication is because going into the construction industry, I'm going to have those people that I struggle to communicate with, right? And they're going to be from different cultures, but it's important that you realize that and you find ways to move forward with effective and respectful communication. Um, he also mentioned, going back to it, he also mentioned that Americans could be more patient with them, which I understand, and I will try and live that in my life, right? From his perspective, if Americans would have been just slightly more patient with him, his transition would have been 10 times easier. And I think that that's something that all of us should try and incorporate in our lives is, maintain patience and respect with people from different cultures, because although that's not normal to us, it's very not normal to them. They're in a totally different place with totally different people. Moving forward, I'm going to try to be more intentional with how I communicate and make an effort to understand these other people's perspectives before assuming anything. And I think overall, this interview just showed me that cultural differences go beyond traditions and they impact how communication works, which is what I took out of it completely. And I think just connecting it back to class concepts, this class is so critical in understanding these things and developing leadership tactics. And I just think this experience helped me develop a good understanding of cultural diversity and how I can apply all this knowledge that I've learned moving forward. Thank you.